Hey everyone, Cadaver Kelly here, and in this video I'm going to be counting down my top 10 bands from the 1990s. I already did a top 10 countdown for the 2010s and 2000s, so I will link those in the description. The next one of these videos will be for the 1980s, which will be so hard to narrow down. The 90s were a really good decade in goth. I was born in 92, so obviously I wasn't listening to this music when it was released. Could you imagine that though? A literal baby that listens to goth music and has like really strong opinions about darkwave. Before we get into the countdown, I have 3 quick honorable mentions. The first is Garden of Delight. Garden of Delight are a dark alternative band from Germany that formed in 1990 and disbanded in 1997. Their work ventures into a few different genres, from goth rock to acoustic to Celtic rock. The lead singer, Arto Seth, went on to form Merciful Nuns, which I included in my top 10 goth bands from the 2010s. The second honorable mention is LYSIA. LYSIA is a brilliant ethereal wave group that formed in 1988 in Tempe, Arizona. The only reason I did not include LYSIA in the countdown is because they formed and released their first studio album in the late 80s, but I do feel that LYSIA was a major contributor to the American darkwave scene in the 90s, so this seemed like the appropriate video to bring them up in. I have had the pleasure of interacting with vocalist Tara Van Flower online a few times. She has watched some of my videos in the past, and as a LYSIA fan, that's really exciting. She's very kind and I appreciate her work so much. LYSIA's most recent release was in 2018. The third honorable mention is Two Witches. Two Witches are a goth rock band from Finland and formed in 1987. The reason I don't have them in the countdown is similar to LYSIA. They formed in the late 80s and started releasing before the 90s, but I think they made the most impact in the 90s, so I wanted to include them in this video. As far as I can tell, Two Witches' most recent studio album was released in 2014 and also released a live album in 2016. On to the countdown. Band number 10 is Brotherhood of Pagans. Brotherhood of Pagans are a goth rock band from France that formed in 1990. My favorite album of theirs is Tales of Vampires from 1995. Their most recent release was in 2009. Band number 9 is Faith and the Muse. Faith and the Muse are an American darkwave and ethereal band from Washington, D.C. They are a duo consisting of Monica Richards and William Faith and formed in 1993. My favorite album of theirs is And When Beneath the Waves from 1996. Band number 8 is Children on Stun. Children on Stun are a goth rock and death rock band from England and formed in 1991. In my opinion, some of their tracks do venture outside the goth territory and is just straight up post-punk, which is fine because it's really good stuff. And a lot of their music is still goth. I consider them a goth band overall. My favorite album of theirs is Tourniquets of Love's Desire from 1994, and I should mention that they actually released an EP this year called Echoes, so check that out. Band number 7 is Nosferatu. Nosferatu is a goth rock band from the UK and formed in 1988, but did not release their first single until 1991. Nosferatu did a lot of vampire and horror lore themes in their lyrics and theatrics, which was definitely a trend in goth music in the 90s. My favorite album of theirs is Lord of the Flies from 1998. Their most recent release was in 2011. Band number 6 is Gothic Sex. Gothic Sex is a goth rock band from Spain that formed in 1988 and released their first studio album in 1994. That album is called Divided We Fall and is actually my favorite album of theirs. The last album by Gothic Sex was released in 1999. Band number 5 is Whispers in the Shadow. Whispers in the Shadow are a goth rock band from Austria and formed in 1996. My favorite album of theirs is Laudanum from 1997. Their most recent release was in 2014. Band number 4 is Rosetta Stone. Rosetta Stone is an English goth rock band that formed in the mid-80s but didn't release their first studio album until 1991. That's actually my favorite album of theirs, and it's called An Eye for the Main Chance. Rosetta Stone released an album this year called Seems Like Forever. The only reason I didn't review that album on my channel was because it was a re-recording and release of songs from Misery Lab, which was a side project of founding Rosetta Stone member Coral King. But it's still a great album, so check that out. Band number 3 is Paralysed Age. Paralysed Age is a goth darkwave band from Germany that formed in 1991. This is another one of those goth bands that used some fun vampire theatrics in the 90s. My favorite album from Paralysed Age is their debut album, Christened Child from 1992. They actually released a new album this year called Intermezzo, which I reviewed on this channel, so I'll link that video in the description. Band number 2 is Vendemmian. Vendemmian is a goth rock band from England that formed in 1992. My favorite album by Vendemmian is Treacherous from 1995. Their most recent release was in 2011. A Discord mutual of mine actually wrote a great article on Vendemmian's history for the Belfry Network, and that was for the Project Goth playlist tag, so I'll link her article in the description. And finally, band number 1 is Corpusdelicti. Corpusdelicti is a goth rock band from France and formed in the early 90s. In my opinion, Corpusdelicti is the quintessential 90s goth rock band. My favorite album of theirs is Sylphs from 1994. Their most recent studio release was in 1995, but they did release a best of album in 98. So those are my top 10 goth bands from the 1990s. It's always really hard to narrow these lists down to only 10 bands. There are other great 90s bands in my library, but I had to make some tough decisions. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.